Imagine being in a throne room so powerful that stars tremble at the sound of a voice. Now imagine that voice saying,
How long will you judge unjustly?
but he isn't speaking to humans, he's speaking to gods, real spiritual rulers, beings assigned authority over nations. And he's telling them their time is over. Psalm 82 isn't poetry, it's a verdict. And Daniel 10 quietly confirms that heaven has councils, administration, and consequences. What happened in that meeting may explain why empires rise and fall, why corruption spreads, why power shifts, and why the nations are still contested. Tonight, we're entering the divine courtroom, but be warned. When you see how heaven is structured, you can't go back to a shallow understanding again. Chapter 1, the day heaven held its breath. Imagine it, not clouds drifting peacefully, not angels floating in soft light. This is the center of all existence, the throne room, blazing, alive, overwhelming. Daniel once described it like this: his throne was flames of fire, and its wheels were burning fire. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Fire, movement, energy, authority. This is not a passive God seated in quiet meditation. This is the Ancient of Days, uncreated, unchallenged, absolute. And yet, Scripture says there were other thrones. Let that settle in your mind. Other thrones. Daniel 7:9 says, thrones were set in place, plural. Why would there be multiple thrones in heaven? Who were they for? Heaven is not chaotic. It is structured, ordered, delegated. There are ranks, assignments, responsibilities. And on this particular day, those thrones were occupied. Radiant beings, powerful, ancient, not human, not symbolic, real. Scripture calls them sons of God. Psalm 82 calls them gods, spiritual rulers entrusted with influence over nations. But something had gone wrong, because this was not a celebration, this was not worship, this was not consultation, this was confrontation. The chamber was silent, and then God stood. That detail should shake you. God stands. In ancient courts, when a judge stood, it meant one thing: verdict. Psalm 82 says, God stands in the divine assembly. He judges among the gods. Can you feel the tension in that line? He judges, not humans, not kings, not Israel. He judges the rulers of the unseen realm. Now pause. Why would heaven need a trial? Why would beings created by God, entrusted with authority, be summoned? What had they done? Then the accusation comes like thunder. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? How long? That means this wasn't sudden. This had been happening. Corruption, bias, oppression. These beings were supposed to reflect divine justice. They were meant to govern in alignment with God's character. Instead, they mirrored rebellion. They favored the wicked. They allowed injustice to flourish. They failed to defend the weak. And if these were spiritual authorities influencing nations, what does that say about history, about empires built on blood, about systems that crush the poor, about leaders who rise with pride and fall in disgrace? Could it be that Earth's corruption has roots in heaven's rebellion? The silence in that courtroom must have been unbearable, because these were not minor beings. They had power, glory, authority, and now they were being publicly exposed. God continues, give justice to the weak and the fatherless, maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. This wasn't just anger, it was disappointment. They had been entrusted with care, with stewardship, with responsibility, and they had failed. Then comes the line that shifts everything. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. Darkness in heaven, not absence of light, but moral blindness. They knew truth, but they rejected it. They chose autonomy over alignment, influence over obedience, power over righteousness. And now the Most High had stood to declare their end. But before the sentence was spoken, there was something else in the room. Witnesses. Daniel 7 says, thousands upon thousands attended him, 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. This wasn't private. This was cosmic. Heaven was watching. Angelic hosts, witnessing the fall of those once elevated. Imagine the weight of that moment. The realization spreading through the assembly. If these beings could fall, if authority could be revoked, if sons of the Most High could be judged, then no delegated power was untouchable. And then the sentence, cold, final, unavoidable. I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, you will die like men. You will fall like any prince. Die like men, stripped of privilege, removed from their posts, their dominion revoked. This was not metaphor. This was dethroning. This was heaven announcing that corrupt administration would not stand forever. But here's the haunting question. If their sentence was declared, why did history continue unfolding with corruption? Why did nations still rage? Why did empires rise in arrogance? Because judgment declared is not always judgment executed immediately. There was a transition, a timeline, a slow unraveling. And Daniel, centuries later, would glimpse the consequences of that heavenly decision. The meeting in Psalm 82 wasn't just a moment. It was a turning point, a fracture in the spiritual order, a verdict that would echo through centuries. And as God stood in that council, he wasn't just condemning corruption, he was reclaiming authority. But the story doesn't end in that throne room, because once a verdict is spoken, history begins to move toward its fulfillment, and Daniel would be shown that movement. But here's the question, if heaven once held a trial for its rulers, could it happen again? And if authority can be stripped in heaven, what does that mean for power on earth? This was not a myth. This was not symbolism. This was a courtroom. And the judge had stood. Chapter 2, when the verdict echoed through the nations. The words had been spoken, the sentence declared, you will die like men. In heaven, that wasn't just a poetic line, it was seismic. Because when authority shifts in the spiritual realm, history trembles. But here's the part that most people miss. The removal of power is rarely instant. Sometimes it unfolds. Sometimes judgment begins invisibly and manifests gradually. And that's where Daniel enters the story. Not in the council chamber, but on earth, an old prophet, exiled, surrounded by empires that seemed unstoppable. Babylon first, then another kingdom rising behind it. From Daniel's perspective, these were just political powers, massive, arrogant, dominant. But what if they were also the aftershocks of that heavenly verdict? Daniel 7 gives us a vision that feels almost violent. 4 beasts rising from the sea, not gentle animals, not peaceful symbols, beasts clawing, devouring, terrifying. Why beasts? Because when power detaches from righteousness, it becomes predatory. Daniel sees kingdoms not as majestic statues, but as creatures driven by appetite. And then the vision shifts. The scene moves from chaos on earth back to heaven. Thrones were set in place. There it is again, plural, the council structure. But something is different now. The Ancient of Days takes his seat. Books are open. Court is in session. Do you see the connection? Psalm 82 shows the accusation. Daniel 7 shows the court convening again. This isn't random imagery. This is continuity. Heaven doesn't forget corruption. It records it. The beasts rage. Empires boast. Kings speak arrogant words. But above it all, the court sits. And then something chilling happens. The 4th beast, the most terrifying, is judged. Its dominion is removed, its body destroyed, fire consumes it. Why fire? Because fire purifies. Fire ends corruption. Fire leaves nothing unexamined. But the vision doesn't stop there, because Daniel sees something that shifts the entire narrative. I saw one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven, not a beast, not predatory, not monstrous, human, yet divine. He approaches the Ancients of Days, and authority is given to him, dominion, glory, a kingdom that will never be destroyed. Now pause. If corrupt rulers were judged and dominion was stripped, who receives it? Not another beast, not another empire, the Son of Man. This is transfer. This is inheritance. Psalm 82 ends with, "Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all nations." Daniel 7 shows how. The nations aren't left abandoned. They are reassigned. The authority once misused is entrusted to one who cannot corrupt it. But here's the tension. Daniel is still alive in exile. The beasts are still active. The kingdoms are still terrifying. So how can both be true? Because there is a gap, a space between verdict and fulfillment. The sentence was declared in heaven, but history must unfold toward it. And that space, that waiting, is where we live. Daniel didn't see immediate peace. He saw process. He saw succession. He saw arrogance rising and falling. He saw kingdoms boasting like they were eternal, only to be replaced. And every replacement was a reminder. The Most High rules in the kingdom of men, even when it doesn't look like it, even when beasts roar, even when injustice spreads, even when power seems untouchable. The council meeting in Psalm 82 wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a slow dismantling, a countdown, a divine unraveling of corrupt dominion. But here's the question that should disturb us. If those spiritual rulers were judged and their authority revoked, why does corruption still feel so powerful? Because dethroning doesn't mean disappearance. It means limitation. It means countdown. It means their time is measured. And Daniel's visions show something critical. Every empire that rises eventually falls, not by accident, not randomly, but because heaven already issued a verdict. History is moving toward inheritance, toward restoration, toward a kingdom not built on appetite, but righteousness. And the Son of Man, the one Daniel saw, is the center of that transfer. But chapter 3, that's where this becomes personal. Because if heaven reclaimed authority once, what does that mean for the world right now? And what does it mean for us? Chapter 3, the inheritance of the nations, and the countdown we're living in. The courtroom in heaven was not symbolic. The verdict was not theatrical. Authority was challenged. Corruption was exposed. Dominion was sentenced. And then Daniel saw it. Authority being handed to one like a son of man. But here's the part we cannot ignore. When the Son of Man receives dominion in Daniel 7, it says, "His kingdom shall not pass away. His dominion shall not be destroyed." That means every other dominion before him was temporary. Every beast, every empire, every throne, temporary, which means something unsettling. When political systems act eternal, they're lying. When leaders speak like they're untouchable, they're temporary. When empires look invincible, they are already on a clock, because heaven has already ruled. Now imagine Daniel processing this. He is an exile, a foreigner, a servant under pagan authority. He has watched Jerusalem burn. He has watched kings boast. He has watched rulers demand worship. And yet he sees something no one else sees. He sees that above every throne on earth, there is a greater throne. And above every council on earth, there is a higher council. The divine assembly already declared, corrupt dominion will fall. But here is the tension. If the verdict has been spoken, why does the world still feel unstable? Why does injustice still rise? Why do systems still exploit? Because between verdict and fulfillment, there is exposure, and exposure is uncomfortable. When God stood in Psalm 82, he exposed the corruption of those rulers. When Daniel saw the beast, he saw what corruption looks like when it governs unchecked. But when the Son of Man appears, we see what rightful authority looks like. Not predatory, not devouring, not arrogant, but righteous, everlasting, unshakable. And here is where this stops being ancient history, because Psalm 82 ends with a plea. Arise, O God, judge the earth. That's not past tense. That's a cry, a longing, a demand for visible intervention. It's the recognition that heaven's verdict must one day become earth's reality. And Daniel 12 whispers something even more intense. A final awakening, a final reckoning, a time when those who sleep will rise, when justice will no longer be partial, when authority will no longer be misused. That means we are living in the overlap, the space between dethroning and full inheritance, the countdown. And this is where urgency explodes. Because if authority in heaven can be revoked, if spiritual rulers were judged, if dominion can be stripped, then power is never ultimate. Not then, not now, not ever. And that should do two things inside us. First, it should shake us, because no throne is eternal except his. Second, it should anchor us, because corruption is not permanent. History is not spiraling randomly. It is moving toward inheritance, toward restoration, toward a kingdom that cannot decay. Now let me ask you something personal. If heaven once held rulers accountable, what makes us think accountability disappeared? If spiritual beings were judged for injustice, what makes us think injustice goes unnoticed today? The divine council scene isn't just dramatic theology, it's a warning. Authority is stewardship, and stewardship is measured. The beings in Psalm 82 were called sons of the Most High. They had proximity, access, assignment, and they still fell, which means proximity to power does not guarantee righteousness. Only alignment does. Daniel saw beasts rise. Daniel saw thrones set. Daniel saw the Son of Man crowned. And the message woven through it all is this: God is not absent. He is presiding, even when he appears silent, even when beasts roar, even when corruption spreads. He is presiding. The day God met with other gods was not chaos. It was order being restored. It was heaven declaring, this will not continue forever. And here's the final tension I want your viewers sitting with. If the nations are destined to be inherited by the Son of Man, which kingdom are you aligning with? The temporary or the eternal? Because every system that resists righteous authority eventually collapses. But the kingdom given to the Son of Man will not. We are not watching random history unfold. We are watching a verdict move toward fulfillment. The council has already spoken. The books have already been opened. The inheritance has already been assigned. The only question left is timing. And when the final standing happens, when the judge rises again, where will we be found?